Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Julie Lindo. Welcome to San Francisco Bay Physicians for Social Responsibilities event, Your Tax Dollars, How Can We Invest Less in the Military and More in Human Needs? Before we start, just a reminder, we are recording. Also, we want to acknowledge that SF Bay PSR is located on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco area. And I'd like to tell you just a little bit about San Francisco Bay Physicians for Social Responsibility. SF Bay PSR mobilizes health professionals and advocates to promote public policies that support solutions to the intertwined public and environmental health emergencies posed by nuclear weapons and militarism, our accelerating climate crisis, and the deep injustices rooted in structural inequality and racism. To learn more about the events, resources, and how you can take action or donate, please visit our website at sfbaypsr.org, sign up for our newsletter events and action alerts, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Please post a little bit about yourself in the chat, and please keep your video on during the discussion so that it is easier for all of us to, to converse. And now I'd like to hand the mic to Dr. Tova Fuller, Vice President of SF Bay PSR, Chair of Local and National's Nuclear Weapons Abolition Committees, and National Board Member. Tova, I hand the mic to you.
Thanks, Julie. I want to thank everyone who signed on tonight. I know you had other things you could be doing, and some of you are in San Francisco, some of you are not. So I do appreciate everybody making this your priority tonight. The fact that you have come means you are here for a reason, and each and every one of you is crucial to the future. So I know some of you have been very active on this issue for a long time. Disarmament is a cause very near and dear to your hearts, so thank you. Collectively, we should take a moment to recognize that the doomsday clock is at 90 seconds to midnight. And it feels like every year we're saying this, it's the closest we've ever been. Well, now it is still the closest we have ever been. We are under a great threat. Putin is moving tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus, and it is absolutely palpable that we might find ourselves in a nuclear conflict this century against any possible rational thinking. So this event is for the longtime nuclear activists, yes, but also anyone in the audience who has a cause that they care about, but are told we don't have the money for it. I'm a psychiatrist, and I would say it would be extremely unhealthy if we weren't somewhat scared, because fear is there for a reason. Fear is a very important human emotion when it can guide us away from danger. The problem is learned helplessness. The problem is when fear becomes paralyzing. So there's this myth in the disarmament community that we need to dispel, that younger individuals do not know about the threat of nuclear strikes, which is absolutely 100% blatantly false. 54% of millennials believe a nuclear attack will occur in the next decade, for example. And it's easy to reach a state of paralysis when you feel like that threat is insurmountable and that you have no control. I think fear will only get us so far. In this instance, in particular, I'd argue anger is a much more productive emotion. So let's talk numbers. First of all, the US has 3,750 nuclear weapons, when only, 100, 200 are necessary to cause nuclear winter and global nuclear famine, killing us all, not just humans, plants, animals. The shocking fact is that a whopping 900 US nuclear weapons are on hair trigger alert. So not only are we poised to kill everyone on the planet at a moment's notice, even if annihilation were the goal, we have about 3,600 nuclear weapons too many. And that is your first talking point. The vast majority of our arsenal are a ridiculous show of braggadocio that, full stop, will never, ever be used. And the leadership in our country definitely has to know that. And the next talking point is all that braggadocio takes money. I am going to bet that nearly everyone in this audience has had COVID by now. I have had COVID, and most of us know someone deeply affected by it. I know people who have died from it. Well, you know what? It would have cost us $50 billion to vaccinate the world against COVID right off the bat. That year, 2020, our military budget was $778 billion. That year, the world spent $73 billion on nuclear weapons. And I want you to take everything I'm saying with this caveat that Bob Dodge is going to show us some figures tonight. And many of my figures are underestimates. He's going to talk about this in great detail, but a lot of the numbers that we throw around are actually underestimates. And one of the numbers that's been thrown around is the expectation that we spend $1 trillion on modernizing our nuclear weapon system over the next 10 years. Numbers, numbers, numbers. What I'm trying to tell you is that we could have easily stopped the pandemic with a fraction of our nuclear budget, saved over 3.3 million lives globally, and never broke a sweat. So we missed a very big opportunity. In the next hour, you're going to hear facts and figures like that that make you irate. And you know what? I do think you should get mad, get real mad. Get mad enough that you're no longer paralyzed by fear and channel that anger into action. But what must accompany it is hope. And the hope comes in at the part where your true priorities do have money to pay for them. I'm going to assume everyone here pays their taxes. So what do you care about? I know one person in the audience that's an environmentalist. So a Green New Deal. Some of us have children, an education system that functions perfectly, healthcare access. We're a physicians, nurses, and healthcare organization. So I'll tell you what I care about. I care about my patients not being able to afford healthcare. I'm a transplant psychiatrist. And even if we assume that suffering does not matter, I often see that money is the difference between life and death. And I'm frankly sick of it. If you work in any aspect of medicine, it's just a known fact that those who need it most often lack access to care that is life-saving or life-sustaining. And there's not a week that goes by, if not a day, that I don't mutter to myself in front of my computer that I hate our healthcare system. It's a horrible place to put our patients, their families, and us healthcare providers into. And that is one example. The problem isn't just that weapons could kill us, it's that they have been, and they continue to kill us on a daily basis. It already killed 3.3 billion people of COVID. For every $1 billion that goes into our nuclear weapons budget, there are people dying because they lack access to healthcare. Well, guess what? There's a huge pot of money going into that extra 3,600 nuclear weapons that could solve our problems. And we need you to channel your ferocity into action because you hold the purse strings. So part of the paralysis in the arena of nuclear weapons, because those of us who have been doing this for any period of time do notice that people's eyes glaze over when you start to talk about it, those who aren't already clued in. And part of the paralysis is that the decision-making is made at a level that seems inaccessible to most civilians. To the younger members of the crowd, the history may seem inaccessible, having not lived through, say, the nuclear freeze movement or Star Wars. There are treaties and complicated geopolitics that politicians would like you to believe you have to understand perfectly to have an opinion on the topic. But you do need to have an opinion. Do not let anyone fool you into thinking it has to be that complicated to have an opinion on the topic. That is a smokescreen to keep you from emphasizing your priorities and putting your foot down. So you do not need to be a policy wonk to understand this concept that we are throwing our money away, very large sums on weapons of mass destruction that will hopefully never be used. And truthfully, the use of even one could herald all of our deaths. So there's probably a minority of people that think that owning thousands more nuclear weapons than necessary to cause global annihilation is a good idea. And in my field, we have vocabulary for this. Delusional, psychotic, sociopathic. If our country were a person behaving this way, I would put a 5150 72-hour legal hold for danger to self or others on it, and I'd put it in a psych ward for treatment. The rational, non-psychotic members of this country will respond to this kind of logic. Talk to your people about it. Talk to your friends, your neighbors. Most of all, talk to your congressperson. So it is our responsibility in the US to disarm, because a piece of that complicated geopolitics boiled down to a nutshell is that if the US won't do it, the other nuclear nations might not either. So that is how you convince your next door neighbor, your niece, your apolitical friend to care about nuclear weapons before their eyes glaze over in a 3-sentence elevator pitch, sidestepping New START and the Iran nuclear deal. Our money is our business. Make this your friend or your neighbor's business. Find the commonality. And you're going to hear a little bit about intersectionality tonight, more than what I've talked about, because this is a climate issue. This is a public health issue. This is a racial justice issue inherently before the money even gets involved. This is intersectionality. There are so many other points of intersection, but because the nuclear budget intersects with every other cause that requires funding, because it's such a flagrant and offensive waste of money, it's worth mentioning. Every time someone says, but we don't have the money to do it, I want you to remind them of our nuclear budget. So this is your elevator talk, and feel free to take notes, but please keep your notes out for the next 3 speakers. We have 3,600 more nuclear weapons than necessary, proven by the nuclear famine study, to end life on this planet. Over a decade, the US is expected to spend $1 trillion, estimate, maybe an underestimate, on our nuclear arsenal. And instead, you could pay for X. And X is the cause of you, or even better, your neighbor's choosing. Here are some examples. It would cost $20 billion to house every homeless person in America. A buyback program on assault rifles would cost $15 billion at most. And single-payer healthcare would cost an arguable amount of money up front, but save us $300 to $700 billion. So this is what I want you to do. I want you to talk to other people about this, because that's at least something. But even better, take your neighbor, take someone from a neighboring nonprofit advocating for a cause they can't afford, and a 20-year-old who's got to live in this world we created for 60 more years, and sit down in front of a policymaker and give them a piece of your mind. So we have a fantastic lineup for tonight. We have 3 speakers, after which we'll have a question and answer forum. And I'll shut up after I introduce them, but let me tell you a little bit about them. Our first speaker is Jackie Cabasso, who is the Executive Director of Western States Legal Foundation in Oakland, North American Coordinator for Mayors for Peace, National Co-convenor of United for Peace and Justice, and Steering Committee member of Back from the Brink. The second speaker is Dr. Bob Dodge, President of PSR Los Angeles, co-chair of National PSR's Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons, and creator of the extremely useful Nuclear Weapons Community Cost Calculator, which I know he will be discussing tonight, that allows us to concretely understand the local and statewide costs of the arms race. And last but not least, Jasmine Owens is Associate Director for the Nuclear Weapons Abolition Program, including the #Demand Access campaign at Physicians for Social Responsibility's national office. Her work focuses on centering our collective humanity in the fight for a more just and equitable world, starting with the abolition of nuclear weapons and with a focus on engaging younger activists. And with that, I will pass the mic to Jackie.
Okay, thank you very much. I did not understand what the speaker's order was going to be, so I'm going to slightly moderate what I'm about to say, which is to start out with a little bit of more figures on military spending, not just nuclear. In 2021, world military expenditure for the first time topped $2 trillion. In 2021, the US accounted for 38% of global military spending, more than the next 8 countries combined, more than 12 times as much as Russia, and more than twice as much as Russia and China combined. The US maintains about 750 military bases in at least 80 countries and colonies. And last month, the White House released its proposed budget for fiscal year 2024. The $1.6 trillion discretionary spending request includes $886 billion for the military, near historical levels, and is $28 billion higher than what Congress approved for regular military and nuclear weapons operations in 2023. More than half of the proposed discretionary spending is for the military and war. Only 1 in 3 federal discretionary dollars under the Biden budget would be available for human needs and community programs like affordable housing programs, public education, and public health. Even if the current crisis brings no wider war, the end of hostilities will bring a world much changed. A response from those who rule in all the most powerful states likely will be more arms racing. A campaign for more arms spending and forward deployment of military forces already is underway in the United States and Europe. This will only harden the confrontation between the governments of the US and NATO, not only with that of Russia, but with the government of China, increasing the risk of war among nuclear-armed countries. For decades, we have seen a deepening inequality and injustice at home and intensifying confrontations abroad. I have a stuck screen and I don't have it printed out. Here we go. Okay, but I'm not going to talk more about the very serious and growing nuclear dangers we're facing or about military budget in numbers, when you'll hear more about that from Dr. Dodge. I'm going to try and address the how and how we can invest less in the military and more in human needs. To me, it comes down to values-based or moral fusion organizing. Let me start with a few of my favorite quotes on this subject. Quote, "The budget is the skeleton of the state, stripped of all misleading ideologies," end quote. That was Joseph Schumpeter, an Austrian political economist working during the first half of the 20th century. Quote, "A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death," end quote. That was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in his seminal speech, Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence, delivered April 4th, 1967, exactly 1 year before his tragic assassination. I believe it is fundamental to understand that militarism and the military budget are about more than just military spending and guns versus butter. We also need to assess the purposes and interests that militarism serves, and to recognize how eternal war preparedness underscores a culture of violence that runs from the top to the bottom of our society. Earlier in his Beyond Vietnam speech, Dr. King observed, quote, "A few years ago, there was a shining moment in the struggle. It seemed as if there was a real promise of hope for the poor, both Black and white, through the poverty program. There were experiments, hopes, new beginnings. Then came the buildup in Vietnam, and I watched the program broken and eviscerated as if it were some idle political plaything of a society gone mad on war. And I knew that America would never invest the necessary funds or energies in rehabilitation of its poor, so long as adventures like Vietnam continued to draw men and skills and money like some demonic destruction suction tube. So I was increasingly compelled to see the war as an enemy of the poor and to attack it as such," end quote. To win over the kind of public opinion we'll need to change course, I think it's essential to challenge the concept of national security that is drummed into our heads 24/7 by our governments and the media. In a post-Cold War presentation to non-governmental organizations, Dr. Mahbub ul Haq, head of the United Nations Development Program, spoke eloquently of the need for a fundamental transformation in the concept of security, which he described as, quote, "the security of people, not just of territory, the security of individuals, not just of nations, security through development, not through arms, security of all the people everywhere in their homes, in their jobs, in their streets, in their communities, and in their environment," end quote. This new interpretation, he explained, requires us to regard human security as, quote, "universal, global, and indivisible," end quote. In other words, it applies equally to all people everywhere and supersedes the notion of national security enforced by military power, in some cases overwhelming military power. It seems to me that the concepts of nonviolence, common security among nations, and human security are complementary and indivisible. Looking at the really big picture, I think what's needed now is nothing less than a global paradigm shift that prioritizes universal human security and environmental preservation, over endless material growth ensured by overwhelming military might that benefits the few at the expense of the vast majority of humankind. It's clear to me that the multiple national and global crises we're confronting, including nuclear weapons, climate change, systemic racism, a growing wealth gap, and rising national authoritarianisms, arise from the same foundational causes, and that we're unlikely to win on any of them as single issues. We need to come together as never before to build political power through durable, diverse, multi-issue coalitions, networks, and networks of networks based on our shared commitments to universal, indivisible human security. Given my limited time, I will highlight just two initiatives. There is an emerging movement which I believe has the vision and potential to bring together such a coalition and to build powerful political pressure from the bottom up. The Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. In his Beyond Vietnam speech, Dr. King declared, quote, "I am convinced that if we are to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered," end quote. And he added, "A true revolution of values will soon cause us to question the fairness and justice of many of our past and present policies." The Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, has picked up Dr. King's unfinished work, weaving the interlocking injustices of systemic racism, systemic poverty, environmental devastation, militarism and the war economy, and a distorted moral narrative of Christian nationalism that blames poor people for their own poverty and claims that there's not enough into one moral fusion campaign. In a 2020 audit, the Poor People's Campaign found that in the United States, the richest country in history, 140 million people, 43% of the population, 52% of children are poor or low income, unable to afford a $400 emergency. 51% of people in California are poor or low income, a total of 20 million residents. This includes 62% of children, 54% of women, 61% of Black people, 71% of Latinx people, and 38% of white people. How can that be acceptable given that the California economy is poised to become the fourth largest economy in the world, trailing only the United States, China, and Japan? The Poor People's Campaign moral budget calls for cutting US military spending by half, including by closing 60% of US foreign military bases, ending the endless wars, and dismantling and eliminating nuclear weapons. With active organizations in more than 40 states, the Poor People's Campaign is centering the voices of poor and impacted people and is being supported by an extraordinary range of constituencies, including labor unions, faith organizations, racial justice, anti-poverty, environmental, and peace groups, and is building political power by mobilizing, organizing, registering, and educating for a movement that votes. And I encourage everyone to get involved, and I will put a link in the chat after I'm finished. Here's another example of values-based moral fusion organizing. Mayors for Peace was established in 1982 during the United Nations second special session on disarmament, when the mayors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki announced their program to promote the solidarity of cities toward the total elimination of nuclear weapons, and issued a joint call to cities everywhere to support this program. According to its covenant, Mayors for Peace, through close cooperation among the cities that support the program to promote the solidarity of cities towards the total elimination of nuclear weapons, strives to raise international public awareness regarding the need to abolish nuclear weapons, and contributes to the realization of genuine and lasting peace by working to eliminate starvation and poverty, assist refugees fleeing local conflict, support human rights, protect the environment, and solve other problems that threaten peaceful coexistence within the human family, end quote. Today, Mayors for Peace is working for a world without nuclear weapons, safe and resilient cities, and a culture of peace. And what that means is a culture of peace in which peace is a priority for every individual. As of April 1st, 2023, Mayors for Peace has grown to 8,247 cities in 166 countries and regions, representing in total over 1 billion people with 223 US members. Over its 40-year history, Mayors for Peace has organized or been involved in hundreds of major events, ranging from diverse memorial gatherings commemorating the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, to protests against French, Russian, and US nuclear weapons tests, to numerous appeals submitted to the United Nations in New York and Geneva, and all kinds of local and regional initiatives. According to Mayor Frank County of Des Moines, Iowa, the US Vice President of Mayors for Peace, quote, "Mayors have an essential role to play in international diplomacy. Whether talking about the climate crisis or nuclear war, cities are where the consequences of national governmental actions are likely to have their consequences, and mayors are the first responders. If you don't think nuclear weapons are a local issue, ask the mayors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki," end quote. The United States Conference of Mayors, or USCM, the nonpartisan association of over 1,400 American cities with populations above 30,000, has unanimously adopted bold Mayors for Peace resolutions for 17 consecutive years. Resolutions adopted at annual meetings become official USCM policy. The Mayors for Peace resolution adopted by the 2022 US Conference of Mayors annual meeting is titled "Forging a Path to Peace and Common Security." Addressing the need for common security, the resolution, quote, "calls on the President and Congress to exercise restraint in US military engagement in Ukraine, while maximizing diplomatic efforts to end the war as soon as possible by working with Ukraine and Russia for an immediate ceasefire and negotiations with mutual concessions in conformity with the United Nations Charter, knowing that the risks of wider war grow the longer the war continues," end quote. The resolution calls on the US and the other nuclear armed states parties to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty to implement their disarmament obligations by committing to a process leading to the adoption no later than 2030 of a time-bound plan for the global elimination of nuclear weapons by 2045. Addressing the need for human security, the resolution, quote, "calls on the administration and Congress to rein in military and nuclear weapons spending and to redirect funds to support safe and resilient cities and meet human needs, including by providing accessible and affordable health care for all, housing and food security, green sustainable energy and environmental protection and mitigation, and to increase investment in international diplomacy, humanitarian assistance and development, and international cooperation to address the climate crisis," end quote. And it's too bad the mayors are not in charge of the national government. Mayors for Peace's next membership goal is to reach 10,000 member cities as quickly as possible. So I'm inviting you to help me recruit 50 new US members by the end of this year. And I'll put a link to a toolkit for that purpose in the chat. The doomsday clock is ticking. By doubling down on the concept of national security through military might at any cost, the governments of the nuclear armed states and their allies are putting humanity on the road to Armageddon. People everywhere together need to rise up nonviolently and demand implementation of a different concept of security based on cooperation among governments to make meeting human needs and protecting the environment their highest priority. This, I believe, is how to invest less in the military and more in human needs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jackie. That was absolutely excellent. And save your questions for her for the very end, because we have another outstanding speaker coming up. Dr. Bob Dodge from PSRLA, you're up.
All right. Make sure. Share your screen. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, great. Anyway, thank you. And Jackie, thank you for those wonderful comments, and also Tova. And again, I'm so pleased to have an opportunity to be with you all this evening. This is an area that is and a topic that's certainly near and dear to my heart. I'm a family physician. I practice in the community of Ventura, and I live in the beautiful town of Ojai, who is one of the latest members of Mayors for Peace. Our mayor up there joined after we became a nuclear-free zone and a back from the brink supporting city. So I'm very excited about that. Well, it's interesting. It's sort of, I often talk to people and I say, I think we're in the new arms race. People say the arms race. Well, we're in the new arms race. And I'm sure each of you on the call recognizes that. It's also like a new Cold War. I've been working in this area for over 40 years. When the birth of my first son was, it really kind of got me motivated to say, gosh, I'm a father, I'm a physician, I'm a scientist, and I really have a role to leave a better world for the children of tomorrow and my children's children. So I've been doing this a long time. As if you will, the original Cold War was coming to an end in the end of the 80s and early 90s, there was a lot of talk about economic conversion. And we're going to close the military bases, and we're going to recognize this massive windfall of monies to our cities and really address human needs, et cetera. And there was a big discussion about dollars that were, the military base. And I again, living in Ventura County, we have several air bases close to us. Some of the missile defense work gets taken off right off our coast and things. So the argument was, well, the military bases are bringing so much money into our community. It's a real jobs program. And I decided at that point to start looking at what were the real costs of nuclear weapons to our communities. And having done so, I've been actually doing this particular project, which we call the Nuclear Weapons Community Cost Project. This is my 34th year doing that. And it is a remarkable labor. I literally go through hundreds and hundreds of pages of federal documents to try to really glean the entire nuclear weapons costs. It's interesting. ICANN, which is a wonderful organization, we participate and work with them, et cetera, Nobel Prize winning and things. And they talk about nuclear weapons costs. And they've been doing it far less than I have. And I've spoken with them, Susie Snyder and the group and things. They basically, just to make a little understanding of the differences in dollars we talk about, they basically talk about the weapons, basically the bombs and the launchers. Okay, so it's the missiles and the bombs, and that's their sum total. It's actually a small, and when we talk about the $1 trillion, it's a small portion of the actual total nuclear expense to our communities. The dollars that we really are wasting, our treasure every year, every day on nuclear weapons programs that could be so much better addressed to the needs we started to talk about. So there is, again, this significant difference, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. I really, I have several heroes, as we all do through life. And again, there's a theologian, Jim Wallace, who always has said, budgets are moral documents. And I'm firmly a believer of that. How we spend our treasure, how we spend our dollars really defines who we are as a people, who we are as a nation, and where our priorities are. So I often quote Jim on this area. So tonight I'm going to just go over just a very brief number of slides, if you will, on this project. So how much do we spend on nuclear weapons? Well, this year, again, and it's interesting, this calculation is hot off the press. I was spending till Sunday night finalizing the final documents, et cetera. So this year, for fiscal year 2023, which is from October 1st through September 30th this year, and it's our 2022 tax laws. We're now getting ready, finalizing our taxes, et cetera, that if you've not paid, you'll be paying in the next days for this. So our tax laws for this tax year to fund fiscal year 2023, $90.336 billion is the total nuclear weapons expenditure on all programs nuclear. And this is not the war, this is strictly nuclear weapons dollars. And what I've tried to do through the years, and we can provide a link, is to identify what your community, what San Francisco's paying, what my community of Ojai, what my practice area of Ventura, what the city of Los Angeles pays on nuclear weapons, and ask the leaders, the city council persons, the supervisors, your mayors, Are there better ways we could be spending these dollars? What are your priorities? And I will tell you, this has been a unifying topic, I find, over the years. I've gone to red states, red communities, blue communities, et cetera. And when you talk about whether they are first responders or they're responsible for the fiscal stewardship of their communities, and they see what they're spending on nuclear weapons, which can never be used. These are weapons. If you use them, it's the end of the game. Okay, so they're weapons that we're throwing our money away on immoral, unjust weapons. So this is, again, the national figure for this year. What I've included in this is the Department of Energy and the Nuclear National Association, which is our weapons. That's $22.3 billion this year fiscal. The Department of Defense then is the one who produces the launchers, the submarines, the missiles, et cetera. And so the Department of Defense nuclear weapons expenditures this year is $34.4 billion. And I'll just take a moment. We will be, PSR Los Angeles, this is one of our sentinel projects on nuclear weapons. We will be, it's not even published yet. You're getting it before publication, but it'll be published by the end of the week because many people around the nation use these numbers and write op-eds and go to their city councils to ask for resolutions, et cetera. So it's not even, our website right now has last year's, but I mean, I used to always launch it on April 15th, but now we try to have it up because people are starting to access it beforehand. But again, and it has all of the references. So you can look at, where's the page, where's the federal document, who's saying where it is, so to back this up, because the last thing I want is to have somebody call me out and say, no, that's not true, whatever, et cetera. The next area that, for example, traditional calculations of nuclear weapons expenditures do not include, and that is our nuclear legacy, the communities that we poisoned, the areas around the country and the world. So environmental cleanup related strictly to nuclear weapons research and development and testing, and that comes in at $7.64 billion. The next area is under the under the umbrella. So I put it's included in the NSA budget above, and that's for nuclear non-proliferation. Okay, so what we pay to try to contain and have them non-proliferate to other countries, et cetera. And again, I'm just including some of these topics. The next thing stands for nuclear command, control, and communications, which is an ever-growing, massive expenditure on the complexity of trying to be communicating and connecting on various nuclear weapons aspects and dangers, et cetera. That's also included in the $34.4 billion above. Then areas that get a pittance, again, are what's called CTR. That's the Cooperative Threat Reduction Act. This, for those of you who've been following nuclear weapons work over the years, that originally was a bipartisan, the Nunn-Lugor Cooperative Threat Reduction, which basically was to safeguard old former Soviet weapons that, again, so because in the Soviet Union and now in latter-day Russia, a lot of the former satellites, there was not a lot of money, to contain, control, to safeguard these weapons. They literally contain these old, active warheads, pits, et cetera, behind chain link fences. So, and recognize that was one of the greatest danger for loose nukes, et cetera. Senator Sam Nunn and Lugor came together with what was called the Cooperative Threat Reduction Act, which was used to be very heavily funded and now gets a pittance. I mean, I tell people I wouldn't mind spending the entire $90 billion on containing loose nukes around the world. So that's a 354. Basically, each year that sort of gets cut back. The final one is the Defense Threat Reduction Act, and that's basically also a program that goes kind of across budgetary areas to prevent the spread and also contain nuclear war threats around the world. So those two, so there, two of them are about 1.2 billion, but these are the areas where we're using to quote contain, if you will, both adversary and spread of nuclear weapons, nuclear grade materials. So, okay. So what's not included? Now, it's interesting. I've done this for so many years, and it's interesting because, when it actually comes down to budgetary negotiations, and particularly from the military, well, you've got the armed forces there. You've got the kind of war on terror, if you will, and you've got the nuclear budget people. So you kind of have three different people vying for every dollar in defense. And for years, I'd been doing this for about 15 years. And some people say, Bob, you're full of poop. You know, these are too high numbers. And one day I got a call from a gentleman at the Strategic Security Alliance. He said, yeah, you're full of poop. Your number's way too low. And he actually opened up the box and gave me information. He said, your number's, it's much higher than that. So this was about 20 years ago. And again, interesting enough, when Eric Snowden, we all know Eric Snowden, who was a computer analyst in the military and things, he released his black budget work and things, which interested at the time showed that there was an additional about $8 billion in top secret, you know, we'd have to kill you to tell you, nuclear weapons program aspect. But I have no idea what that is anymore. But, you know, this was something back in the day. And we know that the black budget continues today. It's something that even Congress often doesn't know about. But I'm just throwing that's not included in the number we have. The other tragedy, you know, which again, I'd be happy if we would spend most of those $90 billion, and that's on, you know, when you talk about social justice, environmental justice, nuclear weapons are a social justice, they're an environmental justice, they're an economic justice issue, they're the issue, and that's RECA, the Radiation Exposure, you know, Compensation Act, which was, you know, basically expiring last year. They extended it for 2 more years. It largely is areas like, you know, for example, our Navajo Nation who was exposed to open atmospheric testing for all the years and all the health problems there. Now it's a pittance, and they've cut it back. They said, well, we're going to extend it for 2 more years from June last year to June next year. And they're putting in about $20 million a year, which is a pittance compared to the damage to these individuals and these populations. So again, this is not included, but these are areas that I think when we look at the morality and the total global picture, but again, in my number, I've tried to include, as I say, as much as I possibly can. The next thing here, so the $90 billion. So how I come up, I calculate, I do an expenditure analysis. So the latest census for the United States population is this 333,287,055. And so when I take that, dividing into the 90 billion, the average expenditure on just across the nation for every man, woman, and child is $271, okay, for nuclear weapons. So 271 annualized. But that actually comes back to I then take it, because we have rich communities, we have poor communities, okay? But this, if everybody paid the same, this is what it would be. But what I actually do then is I take and I do a per capita local income analysis, okay? So again, and so the average income across the nation is $37,638, every man, woman, child. Now, probably most of us on the call make more than that, so we would make multiples. So however many multiples of that, you would multiply that times your 271 to determine your own cost, okay? I then look at rich and poor communities to see, because and I use the for example, the city of Los Angeles. I use the city of Los Angeles average income. I use that of the federal government, and I come up with, I call a per capita modifier. And so cities like Palo Alto are almost 2 times the national average in terms of average per capita income. So we come up, and so I identify, because these are the actual tax dollars leaving your communities. Other very impoverished communities are a fraction of that. So these are some of the figures I use. Again, if any of you will look into the links, et cetera, but I let you know, these are where some of those figures come from and how they're derived. This is, and again, I don't expect you to be able to see or peruse it, but again, it just gives you, again, some guidelines and things like that. And again, so we've got the United States figure at the top there with our population 333 million, the expenditure 90 billion, 336. If you're able to see down, you can come in some areas. So the state of California, it will be spending approximately $11.6 billion on nuclear weapons programs. Our state is wasting our state treasure to the tune of $11.6 billion, okay? Having done this for years, I'll just throw out as a sort of a statistician myself, the interesting thing is what I recognize about, you know, when we do these, people talk about, well, California versus this state versus that state. Well, I'm well familiar now, about 1 in 9 Americans lives in California. You know, that's something we don't realize. We have 50 states, but about 1 in 9 Americans is a Californian. So just for what that's worth, okay? In my, you know, I'm the president of PSR Los Angeles. 1 in 33 Americans lives in LA County. 1 in 30, it's kind of an interesting thing when you kind of take a moment to stop and think. But that's how effective California is. For San Francisco County, York County, your expenditure this year is about $454 million of your county treasure is going to be spent towards nuclear weapons. In Los Angeles County, it's $2.7 billion. So again, I have these numbers listed out here. But again, the spreadsheet will be up on our website here by the end of the week. And again, I can include either in the chat or send out for Tova and Julie to pass on if you want, because I have this set as a Google spreadsheet, so you can sort of see all the ones. Presently, I have 89 cities and states done, because a lot of cities and communities around the nation use this as they go to their representatives. Again, coming back and really kind of highlighting some things Tova was saying, some things that Jackie's saying on where are our priorities, again, and really looking at social and justice issues. I really like to highlight some cities and communities that we've seen recently in the news in recent years. So equity and justice here. So we talked about RICA. We talked about our Navajo Nation, which actually goes over 3 states. Again, and just to put this in perspective. So again, I have to move my slide here. So the Navajo Nation this year will spend $15 million, 607 on nuclear weapons programs. Okay, that's insane in my mind. And again, these are people that and tribal members that have been impacted by our nuclear weapons testing and explosions, et cetera, and mining, et cetera. But they're spending an incredible amount. And again, when we look in the third column over, the national average per capita income at 37, theirs is 15. So they're less than half the national average income. And this is what they're spending on nuclear weapons. I mean, if you really talk about, can we have a participatory democracy? Can we really say what we want to spend our dollars on? This is insane. Most of you will remember that last month, about a month ago now, Jackson, Mississippi was in the news because they were having a water shortage and catastrophe. They had an antiquated water system. They were losing, one leak alone was losing up to 5 million gallons a day of precious water. The water sources were contaminated. Well, they're spending $25 million this year on nuclear weapons. Again, their per capita income in the third column, there's 23,000. It's, a third less than the rest of the nation, but this is where their precious dollars are going. We all remember Flint, Michigan. Since Flint, Michigan had, all the lead poisoning, all the children with brain damage, et cetera, learning disabilities across pervasively, blood dyscrasias, et cetera, again, almost $11 million with a per capita income of 18,700. The final one I included is just in terms of economic justice, and that is the poorest county in our nation. The poorest county in our nation is Buffalo County, South Dakota. Okay, it's a tribal Native American community, etc. They have 1,900 people. Again, these are impoverished. Their income average is $12,000 a year, and they're spending $166,000 on nuclear weapons programs. Again, I just pause. This is wrong. Again, we are a democracy. We need to speak up. We need to speak out. We need to make the connections and use these numbers in any way, shape, or form that helps you to make your case. And so that is the end of my presentation. I just wanted to present those out, but again, and we'll be taking questions at the end. But thank you again.
Awesome. Thank you, Bob. And I do see there's a question in the chat. We're going to save that for the end and save all your questions. Just FYI, I put a link to the PSR LA nuclear cost website into the chat. There's a comment by Bob Gould that I will reference when we get to the Q&A. But I do not want you to miss Jasmine Owens, our final speaker of the night. You're up.
Thank you so much. And thank you, SF Bay PSR, for having me. Just one quick question. Bob, do you think you could stop sharing your slides? Thank you. So hi, everyone. I'm Jasmine. I am the Associate Director for the Nuclear Weapons Abolition Program at PSR National. And I'm going to chat briefly about, in general, how the military budget and its just the vast amounts of money that we waste going towards the military is bad for our health, how we got here, and also, just some ways that PSR National is trying to address this issue and reinvest in our communities. But I wanted to start off with how we got here, and just this obviously isn't the whole picture, but these are some, I think, top kind of arguments that have come to mind when thinking about how we got to this point where we're spending, almost $1 trillion on our military budget yearly. And unfortunately, the projections that I've seen from folks this year is that this may be the year we hit that 1 trillion mark. But I think it really starts off with not prioritizing safety as much as security, and perhaps not understanding the difference between safety and security. According to prominent prison and police abolitionist Mariam Kaba, security is a function of the weaponized state that is using guns, weapons, fear, and other things to quote unquote make us secure. Whereas safety is definitely more tied to a feeling of feeling safe from all of the things that can cause us harm. And that goes beyond the things that can be solved by guns and violence. This includes climate change and food insecurity and poverty and all of the things that Jackie and Bob have mentioned. All of these other things that are supposed to provide us with the sustenance and abundance of resources to live healthy, sustainable, safe lives. And writing endless blank checks to the military doesn't provide the safety that we need to not just survive, but thrive. And because of this lack of understanding of the difference between safety and security, and then the subsequent neglect of our safety in exchange for this intrusive and expansive security, we all are subconsciously feeling, if not, outright seeing with our eyes and experiencing how our safety is being neglected. But instead of addressing the root causes of these feelings of unease and fear, i.e., investing in community care, our members of Congress have fallen into the trap of, if we give the military more money, then they'll make us feel more secure and then everything will be okay. But as we've all seen, that is not how it works. Perpetually manufacturing guns and nuclear weapons and tanks, et cetera, is not going to solve the climate crisis. It's not going to close the wealth inequality gap in this country. It's only going to feed into this broader system of violence that is upheld by our white supremacist, patriarchal, capitalist society that prioritizes profit and power over the people. And all of this is 100% upheld by the military industrial complex, which isn't just the military. It's definitely a major player in this entire system, but it's also Congress. It's also academia and think tanks and the media. It's the military industrial complex 100% has its claws in every aspect of our society. And this is how we have gotten to this point. It's not just a political issue. It has become a cultural issue. It has become, as I believe Jackie had mentioned too, a reflection of our morals and our values as a country. And just to mention too, that on the military side, there are about 5 major defense contracting companies that hold significant influence over the government. These are Lockheed Martin, Boeing, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman, and Raytheon. And these companies heavily rely on government contracts for their money. For example, Lockheed Martin receives about 90% of its profits from government contracts alone. And so they benefit from a perpetually increasing military budget. And there's also a constant revolving door between the US government and these defense companies. And it goes both ways. Those working in the biggest defense companies have been finding their way into the government for decades. And government officials have been leaving their jobs in government to then go work for these big companies that they've been helping. And this close relationship also extends to Congress as well. I also think of the ICBM coalition within Congress that basically just exists to ensure that we can never get rid of the intercontinental ballistic missiles because they quote unquote provide jobs and security for these 5 states, when in reality, these 5 states experience the highest rates of poverty because of their reliance on the military. And so this means that our government representatives and our leaders personally benefit from the endless stream of blank checks that are being written to the Pentagon. I'm so sorry about that. Stop that. Our leaders benefit from our insecurity and our lack of safety, unless we do all mobilize and force them to prioritize our needs over their own personal gain. And we've heard briefly too about how exactly this fetish for military, for the militarization of our country and every aspect of our lives is bad for our health. It's exacerbating the climate crisis. The US military is the single largest consumer of fossil fuels in the world. And according to a recent Cost of War Projects report, from the beginning of the War on Terror in 2001 up through fiscal year 2018, the US military was responsible for emitting over 1.2 billion metric tons of greenhouse gases. And to make the situation worse, the Pentagon is very secretive about the exact numbers when it comes to military pollution. And this is on purpose. With Congress then allowing the military to continue to spend more on building military hardware that will then cause even further pollution, this is just only going to exacerbate the ongoing climate crisis. And as well, it's stealing much needed resources away from our health and social needs. We've talked about how this like fetishization about the military has resulted in the complete decimation of our public health infrastructure, which was also decimated by the COVID-19 pandemic. And it was really unfortunate to see too during the pandemic how our health professionals were struggling just to get the basic resources they need to make sure that Americans didn't die. And Congress was cutting funds for pandemic prevention in the middle of this pandemic, while also adding tens of billions of dollars on top of the military budget. We've witnessing a massive teacher shortage in public schools. They are being paid so little while working in stressful and at times outright lethal conditions to enrich the minds of our children, to the point that schools around the country have had to shorten school weeks or ask veterans and college students with no experience to fill in because no one wants to do this work, because no one values this work. And these are just a few of the ways that this focus on just spending on security in the military is just destroying our communities. And there's the People Over Pentagon Act in Congress right now that was introduced by Representatives Barbara Lee from California and Mark Pocan from Wisconsin, my home state. And this act calls for cutting the military budget by $100 billion and reinvesting that into our communities. And as Jackie had mentioned, this year, President Biden's budget request allots $886 billion towards the military, and also that includes our nuclear weapons. And if we were to cut just $100 billion from this budget, we could provide solar energy for every household in the US, or we could hire 890,000 nurses to address the nursing shortages that we're also witnessing, or we could cover medical care for 7 million veterans, or we could provide free tuition for every 2 out of 3 public college students in the US. So even just this drop in the bucket of funds that are going towards the military, where it's just being wasted and abused and used for fraud by these defense contractors, just this small amount would have massive, massive positive implications for our communities. And so this is something we have to do. We cannot wait. The longer that we wait, the more people that will be dying because of our lack of attention and resources going towards basic necessities, really. And then even just beyond that, because we all deserve the right to not just, survive in this world, but to be able to thrive and live abundant lives. And so PSR, PSR National, with a lot of help from SF Bay PSR as well, has spearheaded a new campaign, the Demand Access campaign, And it's led by a steering committee of young health professionals and students, one of which is, or actually two of which are on this call. Hi, Annie and Ode. And the Demand X campaign aims to provide pathways to action for health professionals to help ensure that our national budget reflects our shared values of justice, of dedication to accessible healthcare and a sustainable way of life. And in particular, we focus on the exorbitantly high military budget and how reducing that and reinvesting in our communities will help bring us closer to achieving a more just, equitable, healthy, sustainable world for us all that sees no future for nuclear weapons. And we're working on ensuring that this is an interprofessional, multi-generational campaign where we can mobilize both young health professionals and students, but also other health professionals around the country in support of not just this vision of moral change and systemic change, but also in support of the People Over Pentagon Act as a first step to bring about the world that we are trying to create. And so we'll stay tuned for more. We're working on expanding the campaign so that we'll have actions for other folks to take. And as soon as we get all that finalized, you all will be the first to know. But yeah, that's just kind of a brief introduction into how the military budget and just the massive amounts of monies that we're throwing away could have such a huge impact if it were better spent. And I, echo the sentiments from Jackie and Bob of how this really does reflect our values as a country, and it's not looking good, and we really need to do better. So thank you so much, and I think now it's time for Q&A.
Amazing, you're a star, and just because you've already called her out, I want to say happy birthday to Ode, who has joined us on her birthday, and also remark, Jasmine, thanks so much. I know you're on Eastern time. If you can stay for Q&A, that would be wonderful. And furthermore, please put questions in the chat or raise your hand. We do have one question that is already in the queue that I'm going to highlight after just reading Bob Gould's comment. This is such important info to have regarding Bob Dodge's talk when California and cities facing all the budget shortfalls, so projections to cut BART and mass transit service, when this should be expanded, in my opinion, free to all in our climate crisis. Okay, so the first question comes from Stephen Roddy. Hi, everyone. Steve Roddy, San Francisco. I read years ago that the Nuclear Modernization Act of 2011 was a Faustian bargain Obama agreed to in order to get the ACA through Congress, and reflected his own political roots in Illinois, where Exelon is headquartered, and that the nuclear industry latched on to this weapons boondoggle because nuclear power was then, and continues to be, a declining revenue source. Is this something to emphasize too? Could public education about this dubious genealogy also help to convince people how little this has to do with actual defense? And I think that was aimed towards Bob Dodge, but I'll leave it open to anyone.
Anyone, yeah, doesn't matter.
Well, I can answer it. I can start answering it, except that I'm a little confused because I don't know what ACA refers to there.
Oh, the Obamacare Act.
Oh, okay. So, well, I don't know that piece of it. I know another piece of it, which is what I thought maybe you were talking about. Okay, so in connection with Obama made a massive commitment to modernization of nuclear warheads and delivery systems and infrastructure and missile defense in order to get the Senate to ratify the START Treaty, the new START Treaty in 2010, which in fact, a Republican Senator, Bob Corker in Tennessee, said he was so pleased that this was going to advance, this ratification was going to advance these weapons programs, that it might as well have been called the Nuclear Weapons Modernization Missile Defense Act of 2010. That actually reprised a very similar deal that was made under the Clinton administration in 1996, 1999, actually, when they were trying to get Senate ratification of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, and they put in place a massive commitment to modernization without nuclear testing. It wasn't called modernization then. They were denying that it was modernization, but it was modernization. The Senate did not ratify that treaty because in part because the lab directors at the last minute said, "Oh, we're not sure it's good. Stockpile stewardship will work." So it's a repeating pattern of investing more money in arms control treaties that actually are detrimental to prospects for disarmament. So I thought that's what you were talking about. I do not know about the connection to the ACA, and maybe somebody else does.
I don't know about the connection to the ACA. So I don't know if I can speak on that, but something I think that is also worth mentioning is that Obama's kind of signing off on the modernization program, I think definitely was a pivotal moment that was, I don't want to say the end of arms control, but it definitely, I think, was a moment where after that, advocating for arms control, especially new arms control, was infinitely more difficult because it was completely antithetical to this modernization program. And I think from that point forward, I mean, as we've seen, it's kind of gone downhill, not just because of Obama, but because of other presidents, namely Trump, who forced us to exit 3, I think it was, treaties during his term. And now we're seeing, unfortunately, the death of the Iran deal again. But yeah, I think that was definitely a pivotal moment for our work as arms control and disarmament advocates. I do think that has made it increasingly more difficult to do our work because there isn't that kind of governmental support that we may have thought we had.
Okay. Thank you for that. The next one in the queue is a question for Bob Dodge. Do you get pushback each, I think it's a year, on your financial figures, or have the naysayers quieted down over the years?
Yeah. So the answer is no, I don't. Because I really try to have everything referenced to exactly where they can look at it in the budget. And I would love to have somebody speak up, and because then we can challenge and say, okay, then you tell me exactly what we are spending if you think my number is wrong. And I think what they're going to find is either, number one, I'm right, or we're actually spending more than I've been able to identify. So no, I have not gotten pushback. Okay. I also want to add one other comment that I've been, each year as I look at these things again and kind of dissect them through, it's sort of think I learn new things, et cetera, and things. And it was interesting, certainly, as a nation and even in our organizations, we're focusing on DEIJ and social justice issues and that, which is so critical, so necessary. The incredulity of myself, I was incredulous to find that in these weapons budget expenditures, they're saying we must share this wealth with the historic Black colleges and the historic Hispanic colleges. We must allow them to participate in this wonderful effort to safeguard our nation. And I was appalled. And it came up several times in budgetary documents about how this gift of nuclear weapons expenditures to our historic Black colleges, historic Hispanic colleges was truly a gift. And just to bring these young scientists, I don't know. I feel like I need young people like Jasmine to go, and we need to start a whole campaign and say, we don't want your stinking money type of thing. So anyway, it's incredible. So yeah.
Okay, great. Last question I see in the queue. Please think of anything else in the interim. Mike Martin asked Jasmine, what is the best way to get young people interested in nuclear disarmament and nuclear security? What motivates young people to get involved?
I have found that definitely highlighting the intersectional nature of nuclear weapons and the ways that these weapons do impact and exacerbate other issues that are kind of at the forefront of people's minds. So kind of everything we've talked about tonight with highlighting how nuclear weapons is making the climate crisis worse, highlighting how nuclear weapons they sit at the apex of this broader system of violence that trickles down to every aspect of our society, and we see it in the militarization of our police and our communities. Young people see it in the militarization of their campuses and their schools. It's making these connections, and what it really is getting at the heart of it is meeting people where they're at, is finding out what interests people, what concerns people, what is impacting people's lives, and then connecting this issue with that and making just highlighting how these weapons are impacting their lives. And usually it's like a lot of shock and surprise, and also anger, as you mentioned, Tova. And I also believe like tapping into that anger is also what drives young people. I mean, just looking at the like climate movement and the gun control movement, young people are fed up. And when these movements tap into that anger and that indignation, like we see like young people taking action. And so I think that we have a lot of room to also not necessarily make people angry, but like, when we educate them, it's a natural response. And as you said, Tova, like that's okay, because it helps us grow and it helps us to realize what isn't working for us and what we need to change, and really pushes us to take action. And so I think it's just really important to make this issue as accessible as possible. And even if like I have a friend of mine, Emma Pike, who's on TikTok, has gone viral on TikTok. She has gotten millions of views, hundreds of thousands of likes on her videos, just informing and educating people about the danger of nuclear weapons. And I just saw a TikTok recently from just some random young person who was like, y'all, I just found this girl on TikTok who educates us about nuclear weapons. And she's like, this is not okay. Like we have to do something. And so it's just really great to see when young people are using these creative methods to reach other young people, and it's working. So I think it's like, get creative, make it accessible, and really tap into what gets people to take action and work with that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jasmine. Bob Dodge has a question for one of the speakers.
No, I actually wanted to add to that again. So my feeling is, it's almost a myth, in my experience, that young people don't care. I find that unfortunately our education system does not make them aware. And what I've found, the greatest way to get young people involved is to make them aware. And again, Jasmine, yourself, Tova, are so wonderful at so many of the new social media, TikToks, et cetera, that engage them, et cetera. But my experience, we did when we went for Los Angeles to get the Los Angeles back from the Brink resolution, which was the largest city in the nation, et cetera. We brought the young people from Nuclear Free Schools program. Well, I had introduced these kids at Nuclear Free Schools program to nuclear weapons and the dangers. And they're like, holy crap, what do we do? How do we get involved? They didn't need a moment to think about it. They just needed to be told, what can we do? And so there's so many ways. So I think the key is making them aware. And so we each have that opportunity. And then like Jasmine said, and we're all saying, making the connections. What are your priorities? Well, it could be anything from, I want the best surf break in the world to be protected. I don't want to be blown up. Good, I'm going to be active. Whatever it is, again, significant or seeming less significant. Once they make the connection, they're there. And so I think, and then the key there is what actions. And so Jasmine's so good about getting them actions. The Back from the Brink campaign gives them tremendous actions as we're building coalitions across the nation, et cetera. So there are many ways, but the key is you need to inform them. It's the unusual one who doesn't buy into it, and then you need to let them know, what can I do? So that's the key.
Can I add something also?
Please.
So I want to just challenge all of us a little bit. if we're really working in an intersectional, multi-issue, multi-generational, et cetera way, then we can't just say, oh, this is the most important issue. We have to say, what are you concerned about? How can I help you? How can I support you? And sometimes that means that you actually have to step back and wait a while and sort of show by example. I have been I've been very successful raising these issues in the California Poor People's Campaign by not talking about them all the time and by showing up for other people's issues and concerns. And I've got a tremendous now people are coming to me. What about this? What about this? You know, and so we have to train ourselves to out of our old habits of saying, you all have to, now that you know about it, you have to drop everything and work on this. We all have to have each other's backs. That's what I was trying to say. It's hard to do. It takes a long time it took me a long time to internalize it, even though I believed it for many years. But I think that's what moral fusion is. We have each other's backs, and that way we will grow bigger and we will grow stronger.
Fantastic. Are there any final questions that people have before we conclude our night? Okay, well, unless Julie or somebody else from San Francisco Bay PSR have something they'd like to add. Oh, one last comment. Thanks, Jackie, Bob, and Jasmine. I want to thank them myself. And on behalf of everybody here, thank you so much to our speakers and those of you who joined us. If you're interested in more of what we have to do, we're sfbaypsr.org. Feel free to contact us, join our Nuclear Weapons Abolition Committee, and I hope you have a wonderful night. Thank you.